We created all of our shit together. Now, did we have stuff that we brought from previous lives and previous relationships and obviously the time before we met? Absolutely. And I think that those things also obviously play a role in the problems that get created in the relationship. But it really took both of us actively working on ourselves and actively working on our relationship before any of those problems started to change. Prior to that, it was just the continual spiral of chaos, which we were very accustomed to from our lives before, right? That was the norm. So, of course, nothing was getting fixed. But that was the impetus for the post, was just the reminder that it's like, hey, if you're over there pointing fingers at your partner, that whole thing. We saw this one recently where it was, if you're pointing a finger at somebody, you got four fingers. You got four penises pointing back at you, right? One finger pointed at you. I got four pointed back at me, something like that.
Yeah.
And then the lady was like pointing all of her fingers. I love it. But yeah, it took both of us, and it's ongoing and continual. That's always going to be the story. Mm-hmm. That story doesn't change.
It doesn't. It doesn't change. And I think one of the things that people get confused is when you're taking accountability for yourself and your actions in the relationship, you're not taking, like when you both got yourselves there and it's going to take both of you to get it out, it's not saying that you are responsible for your partner's behaviors as much as they are not responsible for yours. However, the dynamic and the energy that you are bringing to the relationship is you are responsible for. Your behaviors and actions, you're responsible for. The energy that you are bringing, the connection you are bringing. Now, you can't do it all yourself. That is true. You cannot do it all yourself. As you were starting to say, I think before I interrupted on one part, is that if there's only one of you that really is willing to do the work and as one of you are doing it, there's, maybe the other partner is going to start to grow with you and maybe you're going to grow apart and the relationship's going to go, because as much as one person can't break it, one person can't fix it. It takes both of you. Hope we've caveated enough that we're not talking about violence here. But one of the things is that I would blame my responses on your behaviors too.
What do you mean?
And I couldn't possibly regulate myself when you were still behaving so horribly, I guess. I don't know how to say it. Like as long as you were causing problems in our relationship, I had, which was one of my mechanisms, the excuse to not do my part because I was too busy trying to.
Like you got to play cleanup, and like your responses were valid.
My response
because of what I was doing,
right? Because of what you're doing, because of play cleanup, because I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't do the things that I needed to do to maintain mine because
too busy cleaning up after Craig. I was too busy
cleaning up and covering for, and all of these just like different things that had to come up, which those were the tools that I had at the time. And the tools that I have now says it's actually, and the other part, right, is like, I knew deep down in my like shame that it was my fault, which is why another reason I was projecting, it was my fault for your behaviors. If I could just be better, then we wouldn't have the problems that we were having. But that was harder. So I would shame myself and not do the work on myself, or I would exhaust myself and not being able to. All of this just kept being full of excuses of why I wasn't healing, why I wasn't working on me. And at the time, yeah, they were valid. They were valid because I didn't have the tools. And then when I started getting the tools, I didn't know how to use the tools. So they were valid until I started to separate from that story, from that narrative, and regardless of what you were doing, started to work on myself, started to like really make shifts within myself and start to show up in our relationship as me, as opposed to a reaction to you. Also, that was a program that I had. Everything had to be a reaction towards. So it just goes so layers and layers and layers and layers. Now, none of this is saying that I deserved any negative behaviors. Now, granted, I'm just speaking for me. Don't sit over here and think that I'm just this little innocent thing and Craig didn't have shit to deal with. Okay. He's got his own version of this. But this is just for me on this part. And it was really challenging to realize the role that I was playing. I wasn't responsible for your behaviors, but I was responsible for half of the relationship having issues. I was responsible for my portion of what I was giving, and I had to shift my behaviors, my beliefs, my patterns, my communication, my everything that was just like the way that I would project out. I had to shift that. I had to start taking accountability, and it didn't change your behaviors. It didn't mean that what was happening wasn't happening. It wasn't saying that, oh, now I'm gaslighting myself. This isn't happening or it's all my fault. It was very much but this is what I'm doing for me now. This is how I'm showing up, and start to build my building blocks. And I don't know what your situation was like. I don't know, but like it feels like for me, what I saw is that you really started taking accountability for your behaviors, your actions, the energy that you were bringing. Maybe I'm wrong, and I would love to hear your side of it, but I feel like we both had to really ground in of what ours was actually ours and how we were coming together in that space. What does
I
that
agree
feel
completely.
like? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that's one of the really big key things is, I mean, it's one thing to acknowledge that like two people make all these problems, two people are creating a relate or multiple people, if you've got multiple people in your
Right.
relationship, right? There's always that caveat where we talk a lot about this thing from our lived experience. But the reality too is you can have awareness that your problems are creating these problems, right? Your issues are creating these issues. But until you really start taking accountability for what those things are, nothing will change. And that's where the big change started to really take place for both of us, is when we both started taking accountability. Because it wasn't just Craig starts dealing with his shit and taking accountability for his actions and starts trying to be responsible. You had to also, right? And part of taking accountability, I think, at least for me, was really looking at my actions and the ramifications of the choices that I've made and sitting in the truth of those things for myself. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. I know that I did. I still do. Because when you sit with the accountability of what things, like when you sit in the accountability of your choices and your actions, you see the truth of those things, at least to your lenses and your perspective, right? And there's some really hard truths that some people have to sit with, myself included, right?
We were meant to be.